Hey Dave, thanks for the intro. And hi everyone. Thanks for joining. Today's session is about mobile device management and mobile application management and how the two products are better together. So this is an Intune session. Mobile application management is really a tool that's available through Intune, but it's actually an Azure thing because you need some other components in behind Intune configured properly in order to make the MAM component as fully functional as it's really designed to be. So first off, you need to have your AAD. Your AAD is going to give you your authentication, your authorization. It's going to tell Intune what groups you're a member of, and from those groups, what level of access you're supposed to have. And that's where conditional access comes in. Conditional access controls will define what gates a device or a user has to pass before they can get access to data. And then Azure Information Protection is going to provide Intune with the flags, the sensitivity labels for each of the documents, so that it knows what level of challenge to provide the end user and the device before that data can be accessed or manipulated. So basically, it's fence posts, right? So because in a mobile application management world, what we're not doing is managing the device. So as a result of that, we can't go through and force changes on them. All we can do is say, before you can access the data, your device needs to meet this criteria, or your user account needs to meet this criteria. And then if either of those aren't true, then you're denied access. So we know MDM. What's MAM? As I mentioned, mobile application management is for non-managed devices. We use them primarily for personal devices. There's a transition right now where not everybody, especially right now, where not everybody has the ability to use a corporate owned or corporate issued device to access work. But everybody has a machine, everybody has an iPhone or an Android. So we need to give them the ability to use those devices to access corporate data. But we also need to ensure that our data is still protected and our data cannot be compromised or lost as a result of this new form of connection. So if we look at MDM, when you enroll a device in MDM, that now comes under corporate management. Corporate management has the ability to define the configuration of the device by removing or adding applications automatically. They have the ability to wipe and reset the device at any time. They have the ability to track the device. All of these things may not be what either the organization or the end user or both wants to have happen to personally owned devices. So MAM provides us the ability to control the corporate aspect of this connection. So we will know when Joe connects into Office 365 using his personal device. We will be able to tell that he connected through, a Samsung Note 10, and this was his patch level. We can't tell pretty much anything else. We can't tell his phone number. We don't have his location ID. We don't have the ability to wipe his device. What we do have the ability to do is called an app selective wipe, or we can remove all of the corporate data off of that device without affecting any of the personal stuff. So that gives us the ability to control data on that device without actually impacting or affecting anything personally. And we'll go into that a little bit later. So how's MAM really different from MDM? MDM is more for corporate owned devices. MDM will give you full auto enrollment capabilities and full auto provisioning capabilities, both for Windows devices, Android devices, and iOS, macOS devices. So we can take a device that has never been broken, the seal has never been broken on the box, and deliver that to an end user. And when they power it on for the first time, it'll say their name and welcome to your organization, and please type in your password, right? So we have the ability to control all of that at the very, very initial stages through corporate-owned devices. From Windows devices, not only can we do that, we can also force down application deployments or device configurations and do a lot of the day-to-day operations that we typically would do in Config Manager. Now, from mobile application management, again, remember the devices are not enrolled. You can't manage them. So you don't have the authority to push an application down to the device, right? So what we'll be able to do with mobile application management is make those applications available inside of what's called the company portal, which is just an app you download from the company store. And we can make internal applications, corporate written applications, or proprietary licensed applications available to machines that we don't manage safely and effectively through that company portal. And we can require authorization into that, or authentication into that portal. So when users log in, we can ensure that our internal applications aren't getting installed on, the general public's devices, but we can also enforce we can't enforce. We have the ability to publish applications based upon group membership. So members of the management group, for example, would have the admin console for the timekeeping system, whereas all of the general staff would have the time entry system, right, as an example. AIP and conditional access are absolutely critical for mobile application management. If you don't have AIP and CA turned on and configured and policies or labels created inside of there, what you're going to get from a MAM enrolled device is merely registration data. You'll know, like I said earlier, that Joe logged in with a Samsung 10 on this date at this time to access this resource. That's really all you're going to be able to do. You don't have, you have the ability to delete the accounts, the entire accounts off the device, but that's really it. So what you'll do is you'll use Azure Information Protection to define sensitivity labels inside of documents. Now, AIP is, if you think back to, 18 years ago now, when Exchange 2003 came out, they had these privacy labels that you could apply to emails or documents. And by putting a certain filter on the document, that would prevent it from being forwarded or printed or whatnot. Now, that was great, but the big problem with it is users didn't actually do it. So what Azure Information Protection does is, from an organization level, it'll allow us to define sensitivity labels to be placed on corporate data. So as a perfect example, I can say that anything that has a credit card number in it, right, a 16 number format inside of a document, will automatically be labeled as protected and cannot be forwarded, printed, or saved to a local device. And that will ensure that even when users are accessing corporate documents from their personal devices, the documents themselves never actually leave our ecosystem, right? They still have the ability to view them. But if they want to save them, they can only save them to their OneDrive for Business folder or back to SharePoint effectively. And then we can have different labels for different requirements, right? So based upon the type of organization that we have and the type of documents, we may have different labels for social insurance number, social security number, credit cards, as I mentioned. Could also be patent information or internal R&D numbers. So if those are located in a document, then they automatically get flagged. What's really cool about it is it happens automatically, and it happens as soon as that document touches the Microsoft ecosystem. So if it's saved to OneDrive, or it's added to an email attachment, or even if it's an unsaved document in Word, a blank document in Word, and they start typing, they have that, they type one of those criteria into the document, the label will automatically get applied. So it prevents data loss very, very easily and configurable, from an included feature. So that's pretty neat. And then to wrap those two around, we need to use conditional access to define gates to evaluate the device connection and the user connection to determine whether it should or should not be granted access, and what level of access we're going to be granting to that session. Based upon whether, even from a personal device, right? Based upon whether the user is connecting from a trusted location, like an internal wireless address, or whether they're connecting from a Starbucks, we can give them different levels of access, or even make different levels of challenge to ensure. So if they're on a trusted network, we may just require their biometric authentication to go through. But if they're on a public connection, we may frequently require a PIN as well, for example. Okay, so some typical conditional access policies are here, and these are really, really cool. Now, what I found with implementing Intune over the last few years is a lot of organization that have already had some sort of Azure adoption and have workloads already in the cloud. A lot of them have already created these conditional access policies, which is good and bad, because now we have a framework to work from. And more importantly, we also have a resource that's already been assigned to manage these policies. And from an implementation perspective, that's very important, because now we don't have to go through a lot of the discovery through the other teams to find out what else is required to implement as we're going through and doing this. So some typical policies are up here. The most important one of all is on the bottom, the break glass account. If you don't know what a break glass account is, that's a special Azure account that we create that is specifically used in the event of an emergency, right? Think in case of fire, break glass. So these conditional access policies are global, and they're very, very powerful. And inside of here, if you make the wrong click and you grant or deny in the wrong place, you have a very, very real possibility of locking yourself out of your entire Azure tenant. And Microsoft does not have a back way into your tenant to get this. So you're into disaster recovery and restoration mode if you do this, and it's critical. So when you're going through the process to create these conditional access policies, you absolutely have to create a properly configured break glass account and make sure that on every single one of your policies, these accounts are excluded from enforcement on there. Now, because the policies are excluded, that means that they could be potentially vulnerable, right? Because they're not going to have these restrictions in place. So there's a very specific process to also create these break glasses accounts. And at the end of the slide deck, I'll have a link to where you can go to see how to configure those. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of times when we go to implement Intune Mobile Application Management or MDM, the organization already has conditional access. And from a modern desktop perspective, hybrid join doesn't really happen, right? Because you have machines that are now going to be AAD only joined if you don't go through and force the domain join on them. But it isn't required anymore for a lot of these actions. So what we're facing is the conditional access policies that have been created and they're essentially epitaph, right? They've been added in through production, and getting any changes at this point is really hard. And their conditional access controls were all based on allowing a connection if the machine is hybrid joined. So if a device is both domain joined and Azure Active Directory joined, then we can allow that connection through. And this prevents people from using personal devices, right? Or personal workstations at home, which is a perfectly good policy. But the problem now is if now we start to have devices that aren't domain joined, right? If people never come into the office or they never come onto a corporate location, then forcing them to domain join is hindering both operations and performance for the end user. So we want to get around that. And what we need to do is make that transition from just granting access based upon a hybrid join device to granting access based upon an Intune compliant device. And then what we do is we work with security to define the compliance settings that need to be enforced on the device before it's granted access. So we'll still achieve the same level of enforcement, because from an MDM enrolled device, what we'll do is we'll say that we'll configure Intune so that the only devices that can be joined are the ones that are corporate owned, right? They've already been enrolled through the corporate asset manager. And that will prevent people from manually enrolling their personal device under MDM. So by switching from hybrid join to compliance and then ensuring that we've restricted the enrollment, we've configured the enrollment restrictions properly, we'll still achieve the same goal of only allowing access to the Azure resources or corporate resources by a corporate owned device. It's just not necessarily calling out a domain joined device anymore. So in operations, this is really important because it allows desktop engineering to make the same applications available to both their corporate owned devices and the devices that users are using to connect to work that aren't managed. So be that, even a licensable product that's available both on the App Store that we've purchased internally and licensed internally, we can push those applications through to these users if we have the appropriate licensing for it. And as I mentioned earlier, internal home written applications, this is a great and easy way to get those applications out into the user's hands on those unmanaged devices. But again, remember, we're not pushing. We can't enforce or require the installation of these applications. What we can do is we can make the applications available to the end user to download. And on the other side, we can also restrict access to corporate resources unless these applications are present on the device. So this helps IT because we don't have to start managing devices that we don't own, which, especially from an imaging and an ongoing maintenance perspective, is a major pain. The other side of it is this is a SaaS solution, so the infrastructure itself we don't have to manage, and we get a full visibility into all the devices that are connecting into our infrastructure from that single console. From an application perspective, again, we can make those applications available to both enrolled or both corporate and personal owned devices. From a personal device perspective, we don't have to force end users to enroll personal devices into company management in order for them to do their work. We have a way to make it work for them without them giving up that level of control to a device that they bought, right? Now, from support perspective, they don't have to support personal phones. So as this adoption goes up and up and corporate device use goes down and down, it starts to reduce the amount of support requirements on that team for managing device issues like space or other applications or performance, stuff like that. From a security perspective, we've got all the controls. There are CIS standards for all of these configurations, so we can implement all those ad nauseum or configure them, as needed. This checks off a lot of boxes for them because now they don't need to be constantly worried about ways or users that have circumnavigated the enrollment process and managed to get their home machine imaged by the management system or something. From a management perspective, of course, people can work from anywhere, and in the COVID world, this is very, very important because we may not, from a corporate perspective, have been ready to provide everybody with a device that they can work from home. And users like using devices that they have bought and selected and use on a day-to-day basis. They're comfortable with them. They have their productivity apps. They've tweaked their everything to, the way that they want to make it work. And it's generally just a better working experience for them because they're using their own tools. So here's some links that are important if you're looking at deploying mobile application management with your Intune MDM solution. The Break Glass account for anybody doing conditional access, whether you're using Intune or not, this is a very, very, very important thing to do. So definitely go to that link and make sure that you have Break Glass accounts configured. There's a very good conditional access guide published by another MVP, Alex Fields. I've included that link there. For Azure AIP, we've got a SharePoint MVP, Nikki Borrell, who has a nice blog on that entire process. So that's posted. Apple Business Manager is very important for enrolling and managing your corporate-owned devices, your corporate-owned Apple devices. So both your Macintosh workstations and your iOS, iPadOS devices. Apple Business Manager is what allows you to really get the full level of corporate management that Apple will allow you to do. And finally, how to implement mobile application management by another MVP, Aktay Sadi. And that link is there, and that walks you through the entire setup of each of the things that I talked about today. I hope this was helpful for you, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of the sessions today. Thanks, everyone.